Whoa. I just got back from seeing Blade Runner 2049, and man, have I got a review for you. So, welcome to this thing that I'm doing that will hopefully be on full sauce. But we're gonna just talk a little bit about the movie live, and then, I'm not gonna be streaming tonight, anyone who's here in the moment. Just to let you know, just totally drained. So review, maybe a movie later, but let's just talk about the movie real quick. So this is a review. Feel free if you need to fuck off, that's fine. But I'm gonna do a spoiler-free version, and then I'm gonna go a little bit more in depth, and I'll let you know when that happens. So if you want to tune out for the spoilers, I'll give you plenty of warning. I'm still not going to spoil the main elements of the movie, so that way you don't go in with details that you shouldn't have. Let's leave it at that. This is a movie you want to go in raw. You want to go in with no spoilers. You don't want to know what the fuck is going on at all. I didn't, and I am grateful for that. So let's talk a little bit about the first movie and what it means to me and why I'm doing this, because, I appreciate that you guys want to hear my opinions and thoughts on certain things, but what do I know about movies? I don't know too much about movies, but I do know what I like, and I know that the original Blade Runner is a little bit influential, I'd say, visually especially, and it is considered one of the better sci-fi movies. It's one of my favorite movies ever made. I sometimes cite it as my favorite movie just because I've watched it so many times. Part of the thing I love about Blade Runner is the visuals, the soundtrack from Vangelis. I think Harrison Ford does a great job in it. Rutger Hauer is amazing. It's a really great movie, but it kind of has some story and pacing issues. But it's fascinating. And it's endlessly rewatchable because there's always so much stuff in the frame, and you always kind of learn a little something new. And the whole plot of the replicants, I think, is a really good thing to meditate upon. So that's something that you can watch a couple times and get something out of it, and think about these replicants and what they mean. More human than human, they say in the Tyrell Corporation. And that's kind of the point of the movie. In some ways, I've heard it described as the replicants are the heroes, and Deckard is kind of, in some ways, the villain. Granted, he's a paid gun. He didn't really have much of a choice, but Blade Runner 1, I have to call it that now, Jesus. But Blade Runner is an amazing movie, and it's not for everybody, but what it does right, I think, is just about everything aesthetically. And I think it's just a wonderful sci-fi world that was created by Ridley Scott. So for me, it's hard to top it. Let's just say, in a nutshell, Blade Runner 2049 got close. So that's, if you want to know what I think right now, and then just be like, okay, that's all I needed, Vin. That's what you need. It got close. And this is coming from someone who holds the first film in very high regard. The new one, directed by Denis Villeneuve, I believe is how you say that, or Denis Villeneuve. I'm not sure. I've heard Ryan Gosling say it like that. So anyway, guy's a master. Has directed so many amazing movies this past couple years, and I loved Arrival and Sicario. And I think he was the perfect choice for this. I'm glad Ridley didn't direct it, to be honest. The movie is a good standalone sequel. Like, you almost don't need to see the first film to fully appreciate this one. There are plenty of things that you will enjoy if you're a fan of the original. But on its own, it's a visual masterpiece. The practical effects and sets are there. I think maybe there's a little bit extra CG than I was expecting, but in the world that they've created, and are expanding on. I understand the use of the CG. I think some of the technological stuff that they showed in the original, they explain why things are kind of shitty. But there's also some technology that I'm like, wow, that's a really good prediction. That's a really good fucking prediction. So the world is intact, but also expanded. Denis said he wanted to add to the world and not just duplicate Ridley's vision. And I think he did a great job with that. Holograms in this movie are fascinating. And I wouldn't mind holograms like that, but they also scare the shit out of me. Ryan Gosling was great. I mean, he didn't say a whole lot, but when he did, he meant it. I don't think people give Ryan Gosling shit because he can dance and he was a Mouseketeer and all that, but he does intensity really well. And the fight scenes in this movie were fantastic. The violence and the action in the movie were done sparingly, but effectively. Not like just pointless blowing up cities, comic book action movie stuff, which is fine. But in this movie, all of the violence and action, it's set, you know, against the story. Like there's a reason why this is happening, and it's done. It's brutal, it's visceral, and it's done really well. I like it. But I'll say that it's not. I thought when they showed the first trailer, I was like, oh god, is this going to be a fucking dumb action movie? It's really not. In fact, it's a 2.5-hour movie, and I would say they probably could have lobbed like 10 minutes off of that. The pacing is also slow, but visually there's always something to look at and contemplate on, so I don't mind the slow pacing. The problem is sometimes there's I think the general movie-going audience is going to get bored for some of these scenes because there's a lot of following a very slow Ryan Gosling walking through stuff, and that's fine because it works for, you know, you're establishing a big world here, and it kind of is cool to see what he's seeing and to take it nice and slow and absorb everything that's going on. The practical sets are great. The music I was a little worried about. Vangelis did the first soundtrack, and it's I think it's a masterpiece, but also I mean, it's a little cheesy at times, but mostly I think it's fantastic and it holds up really well. This movie had two composers, Hans Zimmer and someone else whose name I forgot. Originally, it had a different dude altogether, but they got rid of him for some reason. I don't think he could make it work. The soundtrack is actually surprisingly good. It's not Hans Zimmer usual fare. Like what he did in Interstellar, I loved, right? This is closer to the emotional kind of resonance of Interstellar. And some of the Vangelis stuff is in there, like the same synthesizer is used. It's really good. It's done with taste. And it's actually really... The thing I liked about the soundtrack was it was more like a character, and you felt it. There were times where it really like vibrated, like during the scene. Well, that's just in the movie theater, which is why I would recommend you go see this in a movie theater, definitely. But the music was really good, and it gave space for when things were kind of slowing down a bit. But when it got intense, holy shit. I would say the music really complemented some of the city stuff. Some of the scenes with the city, like, it looked like terrible. Like, not, I mean, it looked amazing, but the city just looked so worn down and shitty, and the music accompanied it nicely. It was probably still not as good as the Vangelis soundtrack, but it was definitely an admirable job, and whenever they reference Vangelis, it was done tastefully and sparingly. So you'll get hints of the original soundtrack in there, but you're not going to get like a full copy. You're not going to get a clone with this is a little bit different. I mean, yeah, you get some loud noises, you get the Hans Zimmer trademarks here and there, but also it's scaled back and it's done really organically, and I really liked it. Also, this might be somewhat of a spoiler. It's kind of not. It's just music. Frank Sinatra. They have Ryan Gosling's character likes Frank Sinatra, and so you get a little bit of Sinatra. You get a little bit of Elvis, and the thing I like about that is the first movie had this kind of sadness to it. All the stuff that was going on visually sometimes was set against this like kind of melancholy and this sadness. And the songs that were chosen, you know, in the context of the movie with Elvis and Frank Sinatra, and it'll make sense. It's not really forced. It's really well done. I was like, wow, you know, it really worked. Okay, so that's aesthetics. The story, I think, is a little bit more interesting than the original Blade Runner, just because there's more character stuff that is relevant to the characters. And Blade Runner kind of had, okay, Harrison Ford, he's got a mission, he's got to do this thing, and you get to know about the characters a little bit, but it's kind of straightforward. Some of the twists aren't too twisty in the original. And also, some people, when the movie is over, Blade Runner 1, the original, people are like, what? That's it? Well, what the fuck? What happened? In 2049, there's a direct link from beginning to end, and it's complicated, and I can't say too much because almost anything is a spoiler, and it's best to go in blind. I don't think it's there's a couple confusing moments. I definitely had me and my friend Mike and Tyler, well, the Mike that some of you know, we scratched our heads a couple times. But when you think about it a little bit, it starts to work. And I feel like the screenplay and the script was very good. Definitely somewhere around the original's quality, but maybe executed a little bit better. It does expand upon the story of the original and the characters, some of the characters of the original, in a very interesting and organic way that it really makes sense. Like, oh, this is 35 years later or 40 years later. 30, actually. Oh, okay. That makes sense. And you get to some of the stuff that it actually strengthens the first movie a little bit. Like some of the stuff that happens in the sequel, you kind of go back to the first one and you might look at it a little differently. So it doesn't over rely on nostalgia, but it gives it to you a little bit in a way that makes sense for the story. It's a new story in this universe with some ties and connection to the previous film. So not really a spoiler, but Harrison Ford is obviously in it. He's in the marketing. There he is. You see him. There's a movie. He gave a shit. He did a good job. There's been some not great Harrison Ford performances in his later years, but I think he did a really good job. He's not in the movie a ton, but you definitely you get enough that you're like, okay, this is good. Ryan Gosling had this kind of slow, brooding intensity about him, and the rest of the actors did a great job. A bunch of bit actors too, like the dude from Morgan, I believe, from The Walking Dead, shows up. He was great. Batista was fantastic, as you know. He played a character that is in the movie for a little bit, and he's really great in it. Robin Wright was in it. She was great. Any of the female secondary characters were also really great. Jared Leto plays the villain. You see him on the left there with the beard. The problem I have with Jared Leto is I can't separate that he's Jared Leto doing a voice. It's just difficult. I know he is considered a great actor, but it's difficult to look past it. Because I'm all messed up, you know? He did good though. He really did. He worked really well for that role. There's a creepiness to the villain and also an ambition, and he's blind, and that's not really a spoiler, but it works. He doesn't disappoint. He delivers a pretty good performance. I don't know if it's like groundbreaking by any means, but overall solid performances throughout the whole movie. True story, originally the Jared Leto character, the villain, was supposed to have been played by David Bowie. That's who Denny wanted. But when they were about to reach out to him, he was too sick. So that was something that I couldn't stop thinking about. I was like, oh, that would have been interesting. But otherwise, we got a great movie. I'm going to talk about a couple other things before I go into spoilers. And some of the stuff I didn't like. were, again, a couple of confusing plot lines. There were some, like, you hear voiceover from parts of the movie that you saw, like memories. And I think that's to help the audience kind of put together certain things. That didn't really work all the time. Maybe a couple times it worked. There's also, again, this isn't really much of a spoiler because I'm not giving the specifics, but there's a little footage from the first movie in this one. I didn't hate it, but I know it could get, probably some people might be like, really? But it's just a tiny bit of footage in the form of like a memory or on a computer screen. And it actually does make sense in the context of the film. The lighting in the movie, just on a side note about the aesthetics again, the lighting from Roger Deakins, the colors, the everything visually was. I mean, I don't think I've seen a prettier movie in a long time. So that's why I say go see it in a theater. It's a visual fucking feast, and that coupled with the soundtrack makes a very deadly combination. You know, there's definitely some stuff in the movie that I felt, like I said, could have been sped up a bit, but overall, it's a really hard movie to nitpick for me because there's some really powerful scenes that I'm probably going to remember. Like, I'm going to be thinking about this movie for a couple days at least. And there's some scenes that are going to stick with me. Like, there's some images in this movie that you see and they leave an impression on your brain. You know, it's like the original did, but in this way, this is Denis and Roger Deakins visuals, and it's really, I definitely give them credit for that. Denis seems to be able to do that with almost all of his movies, but very good. Maybe the city could have been a bit more scummy. I know it's pretty bad, but it almost lacks some of the grit. But there's definitely a lot of like good sets. There's a lot of good locations. The movie doesn't just stick in the city, so it's good to get out and see what else the world looks like, and it's kind of interesting. What else? There was another thing that I wanted to mention that wasn't a spoiler. Ryan Gosling has a character arc that is independent of all the stuff that's going on with the main story, in a sense. Not totally independent. I mean, there's definitely a tie-in, but there's some... Again, this is without a spoiler, but say if you did not see the original film at all, and you have no interest in the character of Deckard or any of the original stuff, you'll get a complete story with Ryan Gosling's character. And he's a Blade Runner, and you get to see the world through his eyes, and it's pretty... It definitely fucked me up a little bit. And it made me think, okay, let's not go towards this future, please. But also, it made me kind of marvel at what I was looking at. And some of the choices the character has to make are pretty fucking crazy. So all I'm going to say is I liked Ryan Gosling's character. There's a character called Joy in the movie, and I liked his relationship with her a lot. It was like... There's a moment when he offers her a coffee. Small thing. And that's a very, very minor plot point. He offers her a coffee. But when he did, my mind branched out in like a couple directions, and I was like, oh man. So if you see the movie a couple times, maybe even once, you might also have a reaction to the coffee scene. So I know, I'm sorry. I'm spoiling the movie left and right. I'm telling you about coffee. I'm telling you about, there's an original little bit of footage. So, yeah, 2.5 hours. It probably could have been sped up a little bit, but I felt like it still went quick. Like, we couldn't believe it was 2.5 hours. It felt a little quicker than that. So, yeah, I got to say, overall, before I go into spoilers, overall, I thought it was a great movie. I think it comes close to the original in most ways, and in a couple ways even surpasses the original. And I think that people who had issues with the first film will watch this and maybe like it. And people who didn't like the first film at all might like this one because the story is a little bit more cohesive throughout, and there's like, you know, it's not as vague about things. It didn't need a voiceover like the first one got, because of the studios. Even though it did hold your hand a little bit here and there, it was still understandable enough that you get the full picture. So I wouldn't really give it, I don't really do number scores or letter scores because it's kind of distracting. People just take that and that's the end of it. Like they don't listen to the whole thing or read the whole thing. But I would give it somewhere around like, if we're talking like numbers, in the 8.5 to 9 or a little bit more range. So somewhere in there. And I think it might even grow on me more if I watch more of it. This is going to be a fun movie to watch the making of. And I think a lot of people are going to watch this movie and want to make their own movies. I read that somewhere when reading a review and a spoiler-free review. And I think that was accurate. I think this movie is going to inspire people because this is what sci-fi is about. This is the kind of sci-fi I want to see. I love the comic book stuff. I love the dumb action stuff sometimes. But this is where I really want to be when I'm watching sci-fi. I'm in a different world. It makes me think about where we are now, where we're going. And it just really kind of, it's great. I mean, it's transformative in a lot of ways. So yeah, I mean, I can't complain too much. Even as original standalone film as it is, it still works as a great sci-fi sequel and a great sci-fi original on its own. So go watch it. You'll have a good time. That said, I do think the movie's going to bomb. There were only like 10 to 15 people in the theater with us, and this is opening night. So I'd have a feeling that this movie, much like the original, which did not do well financially, I think this movie is going to not perform very well, and it's not going to resonate with some audiences that want that action stuff. And it'll end up becoming a cult classic like the first one. Maybe we'll get another sequel in 30 years, but who knows? Okay, so that's the review. So I'm doing this live, and there's a couple people in chat saying they saw the movie, and there's people saying that they had a packed theater, and also some people are saying it's sold out. Some people are saying that it was an empty theater. Okay, no one said that. Huh. All right, so spoilers. Let's get into some minor spoilers. The character of Ryan Gosling kind of struggles with who he is. All right, so you might want to turn this off now if you don't want to spoil the movie. So I'm not going to even do too many, just a couple. Ryan Gosling's character, you find out in the first 5 minutes, is a replicant. So that's the angle they're going for. And the sad thing about his character is he knows he's a replicant. He's a Blade Runner. He retires other replicants. Pretty fucking bleak existence. His girlfriend, Joy, is a hologram. Now, this is all stuff you find out in the first, 5 to 10 minutes. And they can't interact. They can't have human interaction. And that's the kind of the essence of that coffee scene. So watching a sentient hologram with someone who knows he's a replicant is kind of fucked. It's sad. You don't necessarily have that human character to anchor the movie, necessarily. But Ryan Gosling's character is a replicant that begins to learn something that relates to Deckard that shouldn't have happened, that changes who he thinks he is. And then he starts to question it. And one of the themes that I really liked is, so he thought he was really special. He thought he was like something that was amazing, like a wizard. And that whole thing of finding out you're a wizard or thinking you're one, and then kind of, slowly realizing that you're kind of not, but it doesn't matter. I really love that theme. That is a great character thing. The relationship between him and Joy is really, 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 really well done, and very sad. And there's a scene where a big pink hologram lady with naked butt and big old titties. It's a hologram, don't worry. Many of you have seen the movie when there's a scene where he's walking and this advertisement talks to him, and it's gut-wrenching. It really is. And that's one of the things that I loved about the movie, is that it didn't rely solely on the old stuff. It was exploring things that are inherent to this universe, but also not as obvious as you may think. Like, what's the relationship going to be like between, this dude and this hologram? And it sounds corny. It sounds like Star Trek. And I guess it kind of reminds me a little bit of the holodeck, but it's done really well and made me kind of sad. The action, as I said, was really good. There's a scene where a character like hands someone papers and then just fucks them up, and it was like shockingly brutal. There's the stuff with Harrison Ford happens a little bit later, and I wish that would have been sped up a bit. Like, on the way to meet Harrison Ford, Ryan Gosling walks very slowly, and that's maybe to mimic the pace of the original film, but I still felt like it could have been chopped up a bit. I liked that stuff. Any of the stuff with Harrison Ford was good, but there was an action scene in there that they had together, like when they first met, that maybe also went on a little bit too long, but I'm nitpicking. It was just visually amazing, because even though it's just a couple dudes punching, there's so much going on, or there's a couple cool things going on in the background, and it's really fun to look at. I'm trying to think. There's an action scene at the end of the movie involving water and waves that blew me away. I usually don't really give a fuck about action scenes, because a lot of it is just, okay, they fight and then the things happen. And it's like, okay, well, we know the hero is going to win, and then what? I want to know what happens after the fight. I don't care about the fight most of the time. And it's like CG is so good now that you get to see the same stuff happen over and over and over and over again. And it's just punching and shooting. And I get it. Sometimes I'll look at my phone during action scenes in movies these days. It's just more of the same. But they're fun to watch if they're done well. And this scene at the end of the movie with the waves was absolutely terrifying, really, and really well done. And the music was just pounding and in the best possible way. I thought it was a great action scene, and there was a lot at stake. And I was gripped. I didn't look away for a second. So props for a good action scene like that. And by the time the movie's over, there's an emotional kind of resolution to some extent. And I'm trying to avoid specifics, because I don't even want, I know there's going to be people that don't watch the movie until much later that will have watched this review first. So I'm not even going to give you anything that could potentially ruin that. So I'm avoiding, there's so many different spoilers in the movie that it's not fair for me to go into that. So I'll just say where we're at right now is there's some great action scenes that aren't done just for the sake of it, but there's also a lot of really good dialogue and self-discovery, I guess. The stuff between Harrison Ford and Ryan Gosling I liked, because it was a little bit snarky. You got a little bit of the old grumpy Harrison Ford in there, but it was done in a way that I really appreciated and I really liked. Here's a spoiler. You know how at the end of Blade Runner, we don't know if Deckard is a replicant or not? That's part of the plot. Or rather, it's a thing that you can pick up on. The story goes Ridley Scott was convinced he was a replicant. Harrison Ford was like, no, he's a human. It's better that way. Denis went with, he said he was a child of two fathers, meaning he didn't want to answer the question. The question still remains, and I appreciate that so much. It is still ambiguous. It's poked at a couple times, and it's mentioned in a couple ways that are very subtle, and I liked that a lot. I was really, really happy about that. There's a scene that brings back an old character from the first film, and I'm not going to tell you which one, but it's early on, and that was a nice treat, and it was done, again, tastefully, I feel. And then there's another scene that brings back an old character, and some of you will know who I'm talking about. This scene involves Harrison Ford, and it was gut-wrenching. You want to talk about one of those images that sticks in your head? That particular moment where, let's say, he's offered something. I remember being like, what? What? And then something happens, and that was like one of the, again, Denis talks about these images that'll stick with you, and that was one of them. I got kind of emotional. I got a little teary-eyed a couple times, maybe because I was seeing a proper sequel to one of my favorite movies, or maybe because it was there was some really good emotion in the movie. It is as shitty of a world as it is, and as sterile a topic as replicants. There's a lot of heart and emotion in the movie in a way that I really connected with, and that's not an easy thing to accomplish. There's a musical cue at the end of the movie that calls back to Vangelis that, it was pretty fucking powerful, and I don't know, maybe not everyone will have that reaction, but I thought it was great, and the final shot of the movie was great. Finally, I would like to point out that this is not building for another movie. The cool thing about this movie is this. It works as a standalone. It works as a sequel. There's room to go from here and expand on the world even more. However, it doesn't end with a cliffhanger. It doesn't end with a shitty "who done it?" or what will happen? Or like a shot of the final villain lurking in the distance. None of that. You get a complete story, and it ends in such a way that you feel like there could be more. There could be more from this world, because there's a number of things set up that involve, let's say, replicants and humans and their reactions to each other. And remember, replicants were used as slave labor, and that's explored further in this movie to the point where you start to really empathize with them, and you start to think, well, you know, where could this go for them? And that wasn't 100% answered in this movie, but they leave the keys are in the ignition if there is a hope for another movie in the world, I think. But not in a cheesy way, like, okay, there's going to be 4 more sequels. It's not Ridley Scott talking about how there's going to be another 3 Alien movies set before the first Alien film. I think this is more open-ended, in like a director could do whatever the fuck they want, and here's a couple of jumping off points. The same way Deckard and Rachel getting into the elevator together was kind of, here's the end of this story, but they're going to go have a story on their own. This is what this movie ends up doing, but I think even less so. I feel like it's kind of tied up fairly well. So yeah, I got really emotional, and maybe I was emotional too because, you know, who the fuck knew this movie was going to get a sequel? And then who the fuck knew it was going to be like really good? Even if you don't consider it to be on par with the original or close, it's still a good movie. And if you take some of these scenes on their own, I do think it really, they add up. The sum of the parts create a really fantastic whole. And I would recommend going to see it. And it would be interesting to see another film in this world, but it's got to be done right with the right people. Please don't give it to like Brett Ratner or fucking Zack Snyder or one of these hacks or fucking Colin Trevorrow. Can we just maybe not do any of that and maybe wait for like a really amazing once in a generation director to come along, like another Denis Villeneuve. Denis Villeneuve, I think is how you say his name. I don't know. I rightly don't know because so many people have pronounced it differently. But they definitely should wait for another auteur to come around or someone who knows how to make a movie before they, bust this one open. However, again, I don't think it's going to perform very well. And it might do okay. It might make its money back. But I don't see more Blade Runner happening. Keep in mind, Denny, that I just realized what I did. Keep in mind that Ridley Scott developed the story with one of the original screenwriters, Hampton Fancher, and they got the screenplay together. So Ridley had a lot to do with this. He just didn't direct it. And that's encouraging because you feel the DNA of the first movie in this one. Ridley's 80-something. I think if there's going to be more Blade Runner, it's going to be from someone else. And so I doubt it'll be quite this good. But I am very satisfied with this movie. It's 2.5 hours. There's a lot to think about. I think it's going to be also very rewatchable. And I think it's going to be a great movie to find out how they made. And I am very happy with the price of admission. I still can't believe it happened. And I was very skeptical at first, but I'm glad that it turned out pretty great. Someone earlier in chat said, "Why are dystopian worlds so fascinating to us?" or something like that. And I think one of the reasons why dystopia is interesting is like it's a sense of catharsis. Like, wow, we fucked up a little now, or maybe we're currently not so great, but they really fucked up. And it's like, in some ways, it's also a cautionary tale of like a projection of what could happen if we let things go to shit. And Blade Runner, originally set in 2019, we're 2 years away from that. And no, we don't have flying cars, but some of it kind of happened. And I do believe that the reason dystopia works so well when done right is because it makes you begin to have empathy for people. At least I do. And I start to think, man, we're not doing so bad. And we can continue doing okay if we just just take a step back sometimes. Star Trek kind of has the opposite, which is the old stuff has that optimistic, cheery, bright-eyed view of the future, which I think we need in equal dose. And I'm glad that we get both. And the science in Blade Runner is done really well. And it's done from a standpoint of it leaps off of the original, but also goes in a different direction based on what we have now. So I think they handled it with style. So yeah, final summation. There's a lot of characters that are great, and there's a lot of really good moments. And it is going to occupy a space on my shelf next to the original. And I'm happy to say that I really liked it. Maybe not as much as the original because there's some nostalgia. But I really liked it. And I would like to see it again soon. So that's about it. And that's my review. Do you fellow chat members have any questions? Any thoughts? Any questions? What else is on your shelf? not an elf. Not an elf. You know, Lord of the Rings, Indiana Jones, Repo Man, The Thing. They Live. What else is over there? Beatles Anthology, the Kubrick Collection, Space Cop, The Room. Ignore those. Interstellar. I don't have a lot of DVDs because why would you need to buy movies, these days? But I have some stuff that I really like, and here's some of the older stuff that I have. I've got Feeding Frenzy. I've got Gattaca. I've got Troll 2. I've got Final Fantasy VII Advent Children. Fuck that. 310 to Yuma. Plan 9 from Outer Space. Zardoz. Man, I got a lot of terrible movies. Pet Cemetery. Why do I have that? Man with the Screaming Brain. 40-Year-Old Virgin. Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Pink Floyd The Wall. Cloverfield? I don't remember owning that. Gus Van Sant's Last Days movie. And, hang on. Another Red Letter Media movie. Wait, that's Feeding Frenzy. And, yeah, that's about it that I can see. There might be a couple others hiding in there somewhere. Got a lot of bad movies. Yeah, Cloverfield was a motherfucker. Cloverfield is a tough movie to watch. It just hurts, Let me look around and let me see. A couple other people had some questions. Someone says, I want to watch the original because I don't want to watch the new one without seeing the original. Did I watch the short films? Yes, the short films are very good. There's 3 shorts, one with Batista, one with Jared Leto, and one that's animated. And they all give you a little piece of the story. And they're good. They're really good. So I would recommend you watch those. They help expand the world a little bit. Do you think not watching the Lord of the Rings series is a sin? I think you'll like them. It's worth it. Do you like the replicants in this one? I liked the San Junipero girl. I don't know her name. Mackenzie, I think. I liked her a lot. Batista was fantastic. And any of the other replicants that I was aware of being replicants, I thought were pretty good. It wasn't maybe as memorable as Roy and Pris, and Leon, but still pretty damn good. Any other movies you're looking forward to? I guess I'm looking forward to The Last Jedi. I am. I definitely am. Because I want it to be a little bit more than the first one was, than Episode 7 was, rather, and I think it will be. So I think Last Jedi is going to be a good movie. Harrison Ford is definitely looking long in the tooth, so I would recommend Indiana Jones happens like right now. I don't know if action is going to be happening in Indiana Jones 5. If I said 4, sorry. But yeah, I'm not so sure about Indiana Jones because he's... There's a couple action scenes with him, and I'm surprised he does that well in them. But it's starting to look a little bit silly. He looks old. So I'm not sure how... And his voice is extremely... But, I don't know. I hope it works out. I hope Indiana Jones ends up being pretty good. Can it be worse than the previous one? Were there any scenes with eye gouging? Yes. I guess that's about it. So I'm not going to Well, one more question. I personally don't like the original. I watched it. This is a member of chat saying this. Watched it earlier this year. I really loved the sets and the imagery, but it feels like they didn't have a very solid plot or point, other than sort of delving into the fuckiness of the society there. Yeah, I agree. I feel like the problem with the original was the plot, and it didn't really have a straightforward thing to say or tell, but it definitely does kind of give you this overview of what replicants are and the moral question of killing them. And Roy at the end of the movie becomes, empathetic, and he starts to kind of he saves Harrison Ford's character, and the idea of the end is to understand what Roy went through, and also to understand how he finally arrived at the conclusion that life was important to him, and that was the only time he had, and thus was extremely important. The reason Blade Runner is so revered in a lot of ways, for not just for the visuals, is because of the question of death, which is something we all have to think about from time to time. It is the existential nightmare that we're placed within when we are born, and we're the only species on this planet that is aware of our own mortality. And by exploring it through the eyes of a replicant that has a 4-year lifespan, it allows Harrison Ford's character to kind of, see them in a different light, falls in love with Rachel. And as an audience, you start to kind of frame it a little differently. It is a terrifying prospect, and Blade Runner explores that in a way that maybe doesn't have the most tangible plot, but it definitely it hits the marks when it comes to the existential crisis and also how Roy handles it. So I think there's a lot there. This movie explores similar themes and also expands on it a little bit with Ryan Gosling's character and his questioning of who he is and what he is. And there's a whole thing about replicants having souls. Early in the movie, he says something like replicants being born versus being born. Being born, you have a soul. And the other character says, well, you're doing okay for not having one. And he says, what? She says, a soul. And in one of the shorts, in one of the lead-ups to this movie, there was the idea of, well, we don't have a heaven, so this is the only time we have, so we have to make the most of it. And I like that. I mean, there's definitely this idea of when you don't think there's an afterlife, you're going to live every moment to its fullest and stop fooling around. And that's kind of, for me, sci-fi at its best. And that's what this movie did. That's what the original did. It may not be the easiest couple of movies to just jump in, and it may take some time to fully appreciate. But at the moment, I am a huge proponent of going to see this new one. If you've liked the original, or even if you just like sci-fi. So, check it out. That's the review, and I hope you enjoyed it. And, well, take it easy. I'm not streaming tonight, so I need a night off, actually, and I'm a little bit overloaded between this and just life. So I will catch you guys probably tomorrow. Take care.